Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 11th session of the Tech and Innovation Center series, part of the Local Infrastructure Hub. As you join the Zoom and get settled in, I'll welcome you to share your name, role, and organization in the chat so we all have a sense of who's here. My name is Tina Walla, and I'm the Chief Partnerships Officer at U.S. Digital Response, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that provides pro bono technology support to governments. This series is a part of the Local Infrastructure Hub, which aims to help America's towns and cities take full advantage of federal infrastructure funding by helping to create competitive winning bids that bring real results for communities and residents. This session is brought to you by Cornell Tech and U.S. Digital Response and is supported by our funders, Bloomberg Philanthropies, Ballmer Group, Emerson Collective, Ford Foundation, and the Kresge Foundation. I have to say, it's so lovely to see some of the names in the chat because I got a chance to meet some of you last month at City Lab. So very warm welcome to everyone to today's session. Now, as a refresher, the Tech and Innovation Center aims to inspire local government leaders about the integration of technology that improves city infrastructure today and in the years to come. 4 key values guide this series, as shown on this slide. First, we're driven by shared goals. We don't believe in doing technology for technology's sake. Second, we want to design for people. We believe that technology processes and products have to reflect the deeply diverse needs and desires of different groups and individuals. We are not all the same. Third, we believe in approaching this work with a commitment to resourcing the work. We're excited that we're in this unique moment where there's a lot of federal funding available, but we want to think long-term about sustainability, and that includes planning for workforce, policies, and regulation. And last, but certainly not least, we want to build for trust. Tech and innovation should deliver solutions that are transparent, secure, available, reliable, durable, and mindful of privacy considerations. Now, today, we are here to talk cybersecurity. This is top of mind for us at the Tech and Innovation Center because city governments are the target of a growing number of increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks. As more government services are digitized and more smart infrastructure projects are funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law, cities are increasingly exposed to cybersecurity threats, and oftentimes without the workforce needed to meet the moment. Now, I'm so excited to hear from today's speakers. I know you will be too. These are folks who are cybersecurity leaders, not only in their cities, but nationally. So I'm so excited for the conversation that we're about to have. First, to get us started in our discussion, I'm going to invite my partner, Anthony Townsend from Cornell Tech, to ground us in some context for today's discussion. So Anthony, over to you.
Thank you, Tina, and welcome to everybody. When I do these context setting presentations at the beginning, it's always tough, because we have such different levels of tech maturity among the folks who come to these events, and we welcome that. So if there's anything that's very familiar, I'm going to move through it quickly, and we'll get to our speakers and get their firsthand take on this issue. I think it's important to start by just acknowledging that each year we see cybersecurity breaches, cybersecurity incidents taking a growing toll across the economy, across government, across society. 2022, was one of the worst years on record, if not the worst. And there's some very high-profile, really massive incidents that happened. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of reasons why we're seeing more intrusions, more compromises of different systems. Part of it has to do with security just not being a part of the culture, either of designing information systems or using them and implementing them. Two-factor authentication is still something that we're pushing out widely because it wasn't built in the beginning. Systems are complicated. They have lots of features, and the combinations of those features can create unforeseen vulnerabilities. There's more code out there. It's being produced faster, and there are bugs. Things like buffer overflows and cross-site scripting have been particularly troublesome bugs that are widely present throughout the supply chain and have been exploited very effectively. And then networks, particularly as we move into the world of smart infrastructure. Everything is networked. Many networks are more open because they create value by being open. But this also increases exposure and it makes it easier for attackers to cover their tracks. And then, of course, there's lots of attacks that don't have anything to do with the technology. They have to do with vulnerabilities in our organizations and our own behaviors. Next. The other big motivator is that it's possible to monetize cybercrime in ways that it never was before, and this is actually an economic force in and of its own right. This was taken from Financial Times, and you can just see how the surge in ransomware attacks really tracked quite well with the value of Bitcoin, which translated, really governed the ability to monetize these attacks. Next slide, please. Our speakers, I'm sure, will have lots more insight on this, but as I was preparing for this, it struck me that like every month in 2023 has seen at least one big U.S. city see a major breach with significant financial costs, with significant costs in terms of personal data, with costs in terms of essential systems being taken offline, and failure of redundancy to keep those systems operating. Next slide, please. And then, that biggest data breach in history that I mentioned at the beginning, that was actually a city. It was the police department of the city of Shanghai in China, which was, had a group take the data, demonstrate that they had taken the data, and then essentially, ask for a ransom in order to delete the data. Particular irony here, because China is actually one of the biggest sources of state-sponsored cybercrime, and is potentially behind a lot of those incidents that have affected U.S. cities. And now that has kind of come back to bite Chinese cities as well. Next slide. The other important point is this is not just big cities. Big cities have more ability to pay ransom. They are bigger targets in terms of sensitive data that might be valuable, but we're seeing this throughout the entire system of local government. Everything from cities to counties. Hospitals are now one of the biggest targets and are having to go back and really secure their systems. So this is everyone's problem. Next slide, please. Just to reinforce, why cities are good targets. They have mission critical services and systems that they need to maintain. And so, there's a lot at stake that they're willing to protect or to pay to have restored. Lots of sensitive data holdings. And I mean, I'm sure many of you will argue the cities don't have deep pockets, but they're at least perceived as having the ability to pay ransomware. And then, of course, there's lots of vulnerabilities that we're all familiar with: aging IT infrastructure and legacy systems, not enough workforce skills to secure systems in every case, and then poor security practices in many cases as well. Simple passwords, default passwords, inadequate erasure and discarding old equipment and drives and things like that. Next slide. So just to wrap up here, there is funding available for states and cities, for local governments and tribal governments as well, under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The main vehicle for that is the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program, which is administered by FEMA. Funding level for fiscal year 2023 was about $1/3 billion, $375 million. The caveat is that only states and territories may apply for these funds, and we don't expect that to change. That's a political decision that's embedded in the program. But there is this provision that 80% of the awarded funds must be passed through to local units of government. However, that can be in the form of in-kind services, not cash disbursements. So the result of that is that each state has an administrator for this program and for their grants. My understanding is that right now, a large number of states are actually in the process of figuring out how they're going to disperse the funds that they received recently for fiscal year 2023. And just case in point, New Jersey has an open call right now through December 8th, where they're basically taking resource requests, and then we'll go through their process to figure out how to allocate the resources they've received to local governments. So now is the time to be engaging with your state level CISOs and the coordinating agencies about what your needs and priorities are going to be for next year's requests, as well as because the federal process will restart again next August. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Tina, and we will move on. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony, for both thoroughly terrifying me and maybe others on the call, but also grounding us in that important context. One thing that we're going to do, so before I introduce our fantastic panelists, we want to, as always, take a quick moment to ask a couple poll questions, get a sense of where folks joining us today are at in terms of their cybersecurity work in their cities. So please join me in taking a moment to answer these questions. First question is, again, building off Anthony's context, has your city seen a cyber attack in the last 5 years based on your knowledge? The second question is trying to understand who's responsible for cybersecurity in your city. We appreciate that this capacity is provided in different ways in different communities. So I want to just get a sense of that from folks in the room. While you're taking a moment, we're going to keep this poll up just to make sure that folks have an opportunity to respond. But while it's up, I'm going to introduce our fantastic speakers. So first, joining us from Boston is Greg McCarthy, the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, for the City of Boston, and the co-founder and co-chair of the Coalition of City CISOs. I'm going to drop a link to that org in the chat so folks can learn a little bit about that coalition. And also joining us from Dallas is Brian Gardner, Chief Technology and Information Security Officer for the City of Dallas. Greg and Brian, we're so excited you're here and excited to see the results from our poll. For those of you who might be in the 36% who have experienced a cyber attack in the last 5 years, I want to pause for a moment and make space if anyone wants to either come off mute or drop in the chat any insights about your city's experience that could be helpful for today's discussion. I'm just going to pause for a moment. Let's see if there's anyone who wants to share. All right. Well, as always, with these sessions, keep things going in the chat, including questions for our speakers. But for now, I'm going to get started. And if there is an opportunity, if you do wish to share your city's experience, please do drop that in the chat. We'd love to invite you to come off mute and have a discussion about it. But first, a starter question for Greg and Brian. Okay, again, given what Anthony just introduced, I just want to hear, what is a typical day look like for both of you in your roles in Boston and Dallas? Greg, I'll invite you to get us started here.
Stina. I don't know if the typical day looks the same ever. I guess for us, I think for any, not just in the cyberspace, but any technologist in government, I think there's always fire drills that you are battling against. So this morning I woke up, or I got out of the shower to text messages that our identity management system was unavailable, and our team manages the identity management system, so people couldn't access key services that they needed to access to do their job. Luckily, it was at like 8 in the morning, so people may not have been in the office yet. We had it resolved quickly, but that was a fun way to start the day. I didn't need any coffee. I just had my adrenaline rush through that.
Thanks, Greg. Brian, how about you? What's a typical day look like for you in Dallas?
So Tina, when you asked me that question, I had the same thought that ran through my head as Greg's. There is no such thing. Saturdays, Sundays included.
Oh
It's
my gosh.
every day is a different issue. I didn't have identity and access management issues today, but I had to deal with some legal privacy stuff this morning and some other and there's always vendors that are kind of sprinkled throughout the day that you're trying to look at what the newer technologies are, and AI is at the top of everybody's menu. So there is no such thing as a typical day. It's every day is a new adventure.
Oh my gosh. I already had like a very high level of admiration for folks in your line of work, but it just skyrocketed thinking about geez, Greg, were just the adrenaline that you were starting your day with every day. And in all seriousness, when you think about like the purview of city operations and functions that the two of you are helping to keep secure, it's pretty serious. So I don't mean to be smiling and laughing. I mean, this is serious stuff. So really excited to have you both here. Greg, I want to start off with a question for you. You're the co-founder and co-chair of the Coalition of City CISOs, whose mission is to bring together municipal leaders, cybersecurity professionals, and other partners to advance municipal cybersecurity preparedness and through dialogue and collaboration and education. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure others on the call would. What has worked for cities across the country in helping get their electeds or their senior management officials to prioritize this issue? Or is it not an issue because everyone recognizes the importance of cybersecurity? How do you think about that?
I wish the latter was the case. I would also like to mention Brian is also one of the founding executive members of the Coalition of City CISOs. He's our treasurer as well. So he's part of the coalition. We're hopeful that other folks that are participating in this webinar join or are interested in pursuing joining the coalition. So I think one of the things we found has been, or some of the things that we found very helpful is when talking with our elected officials, because they don't generally care about cybersecurity until an incident occurs, is trying to frame it in the way that resonates with them. So I think a lot of the examples that Anthony had shown during the opening of this presentation were around all of the municipalities that have encountered cyber attacks in the past. That helps to, I think, provide us with examples that we can give to our elected officials and to our leadership. Some of the other things that I found really successful is talking about the bond rating. So one of the things that I'm seeing a lot is that our cybersecurity hygiene is being taken into account when we put out bonds and the bond rating agencies come to rate us. So we now have a seat at the table during those meetings with Moody's and S&P. So it's an interesting shift that we're seeing. Additionally, I think in the cyber insurance space, one of those areas is also where if we want to insure, we have to be part of that conversation, and a lot of the things that they're looking for are really important to the organization. So I think bringing in those areas where we won't be able to get insurance if we're not doing these type of things within our organization. We won't be able to get a AAA bond rating if we're not doing these things. So I think bringing those to the forefront of the conversation are impactful to elected officials. I think the other area is around bringing in your CFO. Your CFO generally understands risk, maybe not cyber risk specifically, but risk management in general. And I think having conversations from a risk management standpoint is easier for your business stakeholders to digest, and they understand that more. And I guess I would never never say that. I would always say that the CFO is probably your best friend because they also control the financing of your program. So if you have their support and backing, that is always a helpful tool in your tool belt.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Brian, I'd love for you to weigh in on this question as well.
So, Tina, I'm going to take a little bit of different approach because in May 3rd of this year, we experienced a major cyber event. So I'm going to tell you, proceeding to that, cyber was not discussed when we got our new CIO about 4 years ago. He walked in and says, "Does nobody talk about this?" I said, "No, they don't." And it's kind of a hot potato. Even when you go to procurements, they don't. That's one of those procurements that sails through because they don't want to ask questions because they don't understand technology. They kind of keep away from it. After you have a cyber event, they become very interested. They want to know soup to nuts what it is. And through that whole event, they were very informed. They had a lot of questions. And now the flip side of that is they ask a lot more questions about it. They want to be way more informed about it. And they actually bring me stuff. Now I have council members that are sending me emails saying, "Hey, did you read this entity was breached? And did you see this was in the news?" And so there's a lot more interest. And I hate to use an event as the catalyst, but sometimes that's what it takes, unfortunately. So, but that's what I've noticed in my tenure here is that now we've flipped the coin from not talking about it at all to wanting to discuss it very intimately on what it's doing and why we have technology in place and what we're doing with it.
Right. Well, Brian, I was gonna ask you about that that situation anyhow. So let's keep pulling that thread. Would love if you could maybe tell the group today a little bit more about what happened and what you learned. And I was going to ask you what changed as a result. It sounds like your stakeholders' engagement is way up, but would love to hear if there are other reflections you have on what's changed. But just tell us a little bit more about what happened in Dallas.
So on May 3rd, we suffered a ransomware event, ransomware called Royal, attacked the city, got into some of our internal systems, did exfiltrate some data, and did cause quite a bit of operational disruption within IT. What has changed? Honestly, the strategy hasn't changed much. We laid a foundation over 5 years ago of improving the cybersecurity. We didn't even have a basic foundation 5 years ago. We've improved it leaps and bounds since. We've done a lot of procurements and changes in technology over those 5 years. What it has done is, to my earlier point, is it's expedited. It has made awareness within the city. Hey, everybody here has a role within cybersecurity in the organization, including the city council. They have a very important role to making sure our procurement's going through. This budget cycle, there wasn't a lot of debate about our budget. That was a good thing. They didn't seem to question much, which is great. But we had support prior to that. We had funding. I'm very much in tune to grants and that stuff. So we've been headed down that road for a long time. The takeaways, I learned a lot of lessons, and I can go into what those are and what an event looks like and how it should be handled and stuff like that. There's a lot of lessons that I think could be communicated to other entities that would be helpful to them to prepare it. Now, until you've lived it, it's, you've never done it. But that would be helpful to them to understand that there's a lot of moving parts in an event, and to getting your feet back under you as quickly as you can, and what that impact is going to be to all of the residents.
That's fascinating. And Brian, you mentioned describing that Dallas didn't have a foundation 5 years ago. And you mentioned that you've taken steps in the last 5 years. You mentioned procurement as one of those steps. I'd love to hear, just maybe even, for the cities on today's call, can you share a little bit about what you've done in the last 5 years so that you were in a position when this attack happened to be able to effectively respond and address the situation?
Sure, Tina. So there's a couple pieces, and Anthony alluded to a lot of it in his slides. Technical debt is a huge thing that municipalities suffer from. It's They have a lot of legacy systems that need addressing, a lot of vulnerabilities. The one piece that I kind of thought of when he was doing his slide deck is the bad guys really don't understand us. Like, I can tell you that they see, you know, I don't know what Boston's revenue is, but we're around 5 billion here. They just see that dollar sign and they don't understand we can't generate revenue. We're not, you know, we're a monopoly, but we're controlled because we only are going to get so much tax dollars out of it. And so when they do impact us, it's a significant impact when we're attacked. And that's going to be a financial impact into the services that we provide to our residents. And so that's one piece that I think that is kind of missing, that people don't really understand, is that, yeah, we're an entity and we're an enterprise and all that, but we can't just go out and make more widgets. It isn't the way it works. But we also have this dark side that is fairly vulnerable because we had a lot of technical debt and stuff like that.
That's fascinating. And I think, I imagine cities on today's calls, I imagine folks are nodding their heads along as you're describing that challenge of technical debt, because it's hard to both keep up with it, and then at a certain point, you're always playing catch up to a certain extent, right?
Correct.
Given, you know, as you were describing how the situation Dallas was in as you responded to the May 3rd attack, Greg, I want to get your thoughts on, you know, we heard from Anthony that there's the state and local cybersecurity grants program, which requires states to pass through 80% of awards to local governments. And those are in-kind services. I'd love to hear from your perspective what you're seeing, experiencing in terms of what states are offering to cities, and how is it helping you in Boston meet your cybersecurity needs?
Yeah, so I think partially, I don't want to be a naysayer. I think the state and local cyber grant program is amazing. I think it's wonderful that the federal government has prioritized financing this grant program. But when it comes down to the actual dollar value that we will get as local governments, I think it's going to be minimal. Because it sounds like a lot of money, but once you spread it out across all of the states and all of the local governments across the country, it doesn't turn out to be that much money. But I think there's opportunity there. I think the in-kind service process is probably the way that we'll see many municipalities getting the biggest, or many states getting the biggest bang for their buck. So one program that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts already offers is a security awareness and training program. So they have a grant program for local municipalities that can apply to get a managed security awareness training platform that the Commonwealth will manage for them, as well as phishing campaigns. So I envision that with the state and local cyber grant program, they will expand that offering. So it's only limited to a certain number of grantees every year. So I'm guessing that they would look to expand that offering, because that is a really great benefit. And everybody needs to train their workforce on how to be safe using technology. So I think that's it. That's a low-hanging fruit. So I'm hopeful to see that is something that they expand. I think other areas that I would love to see expanded is around potentially multi-factor authentication and providing that across all municipalities in the Commonwealth, as well as EDR solutions. So EDR solutions can be extremely valuable in protecting organizations from ransomware incidents, especially if they're a managed EDR solution. So I would love to see that type of program be expanded across states. But I think I'm not familiar. I know New Jersey, Anthony was mentioning New Jersey is doing a proposal where they open up their funding and they determine which proposals get grant funding. That could be a way that other municipalities do it. But I think when we're trying to do a whole of state approach, having those in-kind programs that are offered across the entire state is is more effective than picking and choosing different programs to fund based on the municipality's proposals.
Yeah, that makes sense. Brian, would love to hear your experience in Texas. What does it look like in terms of the resources that are being offered to cities like Dallas?
So I'm in complete agreement with Greg on it. When it comes down to it, the dollars that are directly going to get into the municipality is going to be small. I think the in-kind approach is what it's going to have to be, because although we have some reserves, smaller municipalities are going to be faced with not being able to procure EDR and awareness programs and things like that they really need to better improve their cyber posture. And although it pains me to say, I think that's going to be the most effective use of the dollars, and getting those. Unfortunately, it just won't be as much direct to us that we would like, I would say.
Yeah, that tracks. I want to remind folks who are listening in, we'd love to see your questions in the chat, and I'd love to welcome you to come off mute, and you can speak to those directly. So don't be shy with questions that you have for Greg and Brian. We have a real brain trust here, and so we want to make sure this is valuable for everybody who's in attendance. Let me ask both of you, if there was, let's just say, if there were more financial resources made available through this program, what types of things would both of you in each of your cities be investing in? I really appreciate the perspective on the in-kind resources, those types of trainings, et cetera. But with more financial resources, what would be your respective priorities based on your experience in your roles?
So sorry, Greg, I'll go first if it's okay. So from my perspective, I'm going to go back to the technical debt and getting rid of the old stuff that is hard to protect. You can do segmentation, you can do some other things, get creative on doing it, but it's still old stuff that is hard to support from an infrastructure perspective. It's hard to protect from a cybersecurity perspective, and it's just not as innovative and effective in even the business's processes, to be honest. So that's where I would focus those dollars.
That's great. Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that's where the largest risk to our organization stands, is our tech debt. And I think prioritizing that, since it would only be grant funding, I mean, I guess the other area that I would say is our workforce. We could always use more staff, and that is hard to increase our headcount from a line item standpoint. So it's really, I think that would be a great area that we could do a lot more good with.
Greg, I'm so glad you touched on workforce, because that's something that's been coming into today's session, something that I think is really top of mind about workforce. Can you say a bit more about what kind of staff are you looking for? And would also love to hear both of you share how you've approached building your workforce to date.
Sure. So I guess it's challenging to recruit. I think I'm preaching to the choir. We're all technologists in the government space, so our salaries are not as comparable to the private sector. So folks with a lot more experience that are generally motivated by financial incentives are going to the private sector. But there are a lot of amazing technologists that are interested in doing really good work and have they're driven by purpose, and working in the government sector is a huge motivation for them. So I'm open. I think we've had an interesting opportunity here in Boston where we've partnered with a workforce development organization called El Centro. They focus on workforce development for the immigrant communities that are relocated from their home country to Boston, and looking to upskill them, providing ESOL programming for them. One of the programs that they recently launched within the last 2 years was this cyber boot camp. So they go through a 6-month training with a vendor that helps them get a baseline understanding of cybersecurity. In most cases, these individuals were not technologists, were not cybersecurity experts in their home country. They came to the US, they're trying to make a better opportunity for themselves while they're here. And so we've had 3 different individuals as part of a fellowship program join us. One whose background was in physical security compliance, another who was in the financial sector, and a third that was in engineering. And so it's been actually really interesting because those are not the general backgrounds that we recruit for when it comes to cybersecurity. But they've brought a really unique perspective to the team. And it doesn't always have to be a technical skill set that we're looking for. Some of the most valuable team members on my team are non-technical team members, but they have strong communication skills and can relate with our business stakeholders very closely and are able to communicate well with them. So it's been eye-opening because I think our traditional thought processes, they need to have this technical experience, they need to have this specific background. This fellowship opportunity has given us an idea that maybe they don't all need to have that same cybersecurity background. And you can get a much more unique perspective when you have a diverse background of candidates in your workforce.
That's so interesting to hear. You're exactly. I would have assumed that there had to be sort of some fundamental layer of sort of technical expertise or background, but it's really great to hear how you're able to leverage and put together sort of an interdisciplinary team, and then also introduce that fellowship program you described with El Centro to bring others into the work. Brian, how are you approaching the workforce, building out your workforce in Dallas, and what type of staff in particular do you see as sort of critical for those cities who are on today's call, who might be on the earlier part of their journey?
So I did slightly a different approach. Over the past few years, what I did is I utilized my network. I came from private originally, and I utilized my network to bring in people that really had a drive and wanted to make a difference, make change. The pay differential that I'll touch upon in a minute, but the people that want to come in that have some technical skill, it's not every position, but a few key positions where they become the mentors for the rest of my workforce. So bring them in, they understand cybersecurity, and then start to draw from the community colleges, the first people out of the high schoolers that have some technical skills. They might not be cybersecurity guys, but they're eager and eager beavers and want to learn, and they're very hungry for what they want to do, and get them under those people's wings so they start to build out that. And I also know that long term they probably will go somewhere else. They'll probably go and get better pay somewhere else, and we'll accept that in that time that we've had them in improving our cybersecurity program, but also building out a training program within the city so that we can manage that turnover in a better fashion. If they're here a year, great. If they're here 2 years, better. And then when they go on, we bring in new blood to do that. And it's a quick turnaround as far as getting them trained up and understanding, using things like digital twinning and a lot of tabletops. My team does a tabletop weekly, bringing in, doing red team events, blue team events, those kind of things, so that they understand when an event happens, they know how to react. It's muscle memory and those kind of things. I think that as leaders, we have to also push the city management, kind of like CISA has done and other big entities, to say, look, we got to have a level playing field when it comes to cyber talent. We got to be able to compete in the market. We can't be 50% less on our pay scale, because we can't compete at that level and bring people in who want to even apply for those jobs. And I think that that's one thing on my shoulders, is to keep bringing that message and saying, these people, we got to be somewhat competitive. I know we're never going to be equal, but let's make it to where we're incentivizing them to come in and maybe staying the 5 years to get a pension or whatever. And so that helps their long-term goals. But that's been my approach. And we're doing those things right now. Like I said, I got the people and the mentors, and I don't have an open position in Dallas right now, which is great. I mean, that's awesome. So it's working, but I can see that it needs to continue and keep moving forward. I went to a job event a few weeks back, and there's a lot of eager community college talent that wants to get into cyber. And how do we get them in here? And yeah, on day one, they're definitely not going to. They're going to need training wheels, but you know, by week or month 3, maybe we can take those training wheels off and let them go. So
yeah. I gotta tell you, I'm really inspired by both of you and hearing how you're investing in that pipeline, because again, and we think about this a lot in this series, it's not just what you need now, but what you're going to need for the years to come. And I'm just really struck by these different examples that you're both sharing about how you're fortifying your city's pipeline, that talent pipeline, to meet your cybersecurity needs. And I'm sure that folks on today's call are taking notes and maybe reaching out to learn more. Greg, I think it was you who maybe one of you touched on sort of generative AI and how everyone's talking about it and how that might sort of interface with the roles that you play. And I saw that last week, the state of California released a report on the benefits and risks of generative AI. And one of the areas they highlighted were risks for the state's cybersecurity efforts. They cited the potential for generative AI to be used to remotely execute harmful code or to steal or delete data. And I'd just love to hear from both of you. How are you engaging with your city's work on generative AI? Greg, I know Santi, your CIO in Boston, has been thinking about this a lot and really encouraging city employees to start playing with generative AI tools, and has put out guidance on the boundaries of what to do, what not to do with some of these tools when thinking about city work. So we'd just love to hear about, for both of you, how are you engaging with efforts within your respective cities to leverage these powerful emerging models? And Greg, maybe you can get us started.
Sure. So, I mean, we've taken a very liberal approach to the use of generative AI in Boston. I think it's somewhat, it's challenging. So I don't have this magic silver bullet to cure the security challenges with AI. I guess I see us moving in the path of eventually organizations are going to have to license internal AI platforms in order to actually hugely benefit their workforce. So we can actually have the AI models ingest some of our internal data. But one of the risks we have right now is it's challenging to prevent people from putting sensitive information, internal information, into these generative AI models. So it's figuring out where that balance is. Right now, we have guidelines, as you mentioned. Santi was very strong about writing those guidelines very early on, because we want to provide guardrails, some sort of guardrails, but there's limited technical controls that we can put in place from a CISO standpoint to actually enforce those. We need to work on educating people on why it's important to protect your data, what type of data is actually sensitive data, and how to identify that, and how to be aware that you're potentially putting sensitive data into this generative AI model. So I think a lot of it is around education right now, and that's the most effective way. But unfortunately, it's not a perfect solution, and it's not. I mean, we'll never be 100% secure, but it's not the technical control that I think CISOs like us are accustomed to and really would prefer in a perfect world scenario.
That makes sense. Thank you. Brian, how about you?
And I agree with Greg. It's a tool, right? AI is a tool. And so what we've seen in the past, and I'm just going to go to like some things like tools like Cobalt Strike and other tools that have been used in very positive ways for pen testing in this cybersecurity world, but they've also been flipped and used in the bad actors methods too. They use the same tools, and so we have to move in a direction where we utilize the tools in a positive way, like we should with AI and any of that stuff for improving our cybersecurity posture, improving our services to our residents, internal processes, definitely. But we also have to be cognizant and aware that the bad guys are going to use and already using them to draft emails, making those a lot harder to detect. You know, writing code in ChatGPT in 2 minutes that, you know, to infiltrate a system. And we just need to be aware that that's the challenge that we're going to have and face, and come up with, yes, I agree with Greg, educating the users initially, and then trying to figure out how technically we can put in at least speed bumps for them to slowing them down. Hopefully they go somewhere else, to blocking and preventing as much of that as we possibly can. And the more we stay, and I'm going to go back to technical debt a little bit, the more we stay current and reduce those vulnerabilities, the lot harder that's going to be for them. It's not going to be impossible. They're crafted and skilled developers most of the time that are doing a lot of that. So we're going to have a challenge, that's for sure. And from a governance perspective, that's the jury's still out a little bit on that, right? Trying to sift through what that's going to look like.
That's super helpful. And Brian, I really just appreciate you bringing us back to, it's a tool, right? Just like so many of the other tools that are available. Given that the thread we were just discussing previously on workforce, I know there's some tech supervisors on today's call. I saw in the chat folks from Detroit, Huntington, Waterloo, and Honolulu. And so want to invite you, don't be shy if you've got questions around thinking about your workforce and building your team. Want to certainly make sure you are able to engage Greg and Brian on that. But first, Anthony, I think you had a question. Let me invite you to come off mute.
Hi, thanks guys. This has been fascinating. I was wondering if you could just take a moment and expand upon the discussion of EDR a little bit, like what it is, and particularly for some of the smaller communities here, like how they might go about assessing their need for that kind of solution, and like what's involved in provisioning it and the kinds of benefits and protections it provides.
So, I mean, to the simplest form, EDR is basically a tool that is your smart antivirus, if you will. So it's looking at patterns of activity and identifying bad activity and blocking it, preventing it from happening. In a lot of cases, vendors will offer managed services. So they will monitor these platforms and see alerts. So you basically deploy an agent to your endpoints across your organization, and the tool will hopefully identify if a ransomware, a malware is installed on a workstation. It would hopefully stop it before it starts to spread across your environment. So it's not just signature based, it's looking at actual patterns of activity. So traditional antivirus, looking at signature based, still an important concept, but this is looking at patterns of activity and saying this plus this plus this equals bad, when this by itself and this by itself and this by itself may not equal bad. So one of the, I mean, if you are a smaller municipality out there, you're a member of the MSISAC, you're a member of the EI-ISAC, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, that the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center. There are services that they provide. The EI-ISAC, if you run an elections process, is expanding their EDR capabilities and offering it free of charge to municipalities. It's based on a need basis, but they're focusing on organizations that provide support to elections. So if you have elections within your infrastructure and under your purview, it could be a good opportunity to get potential free services there. I don't know, Brian, if you want to add anything related to EDR.
In the state of Texas, the state itself offers EDR, several different EDR platforms that are available to municipalities to procure at a reduced cost based on the volume that the state itself purchases. So it's definitely worth the expense that any municipality is going to put forth, I would say it's, if you have no other funding, it's the first place I would go. Multi-factor, that's a kind of a toss-up. But that's what approach I would take. It's process based. It's not signature based, like Greg mentioned. It's looking at the processes that are running on the machines to help prevent a bad process from executing.
I know we're in our last 10 minutes, but I've got more questions for Greg and Brian both. So at the one of the poll questions we asked folks at the top of the session was around sort of how if they have defined roles or not to lead on cyber work. And I believe like 30 to 40% of folks on today's call said they have a CISO. That's fantastic. I want to hear how the two of you would recommend cities on the call, particularly those in that remaining 60 to 70%. How would you recommend they take steps to strengthening their cyber capability? You had great suggestions around the fellowship program in Boston and the mentorship, Brian, that you're bringing in for your teams. I just want to make space for anything else that you would recommend cities on today's call consider as they sort of strengthen their cyber capability.
Sure, Tina. So my recommendation is, first, if you don't have somebody that's dedicated to cyber, you really need to. They don't have to have the CISO title per se, but somebody that's sitting in that role that's going to lead it, because it's become a significant part of your IT infrastructure. It really is. And if you're not doing it if you're kind of doing it as a side note, it's probably not getting sufficient attention. The other thing, and this is my recommendation, kind of the path we took, was put together a cybersecurity strategy plan. Day one. It's going to be dynamic. It's going to change. It's going to pivot depending on funding and all sorts of good stuff. But put it together, and so you understand where you want to get within 5 years, 10 years, whatever that time frame is, and then pick a framework that is going to fit your organization. I mean, we use NIST here, and that's a good solid framework. But whatever that framework is, develop your strategy based on that framework so you can understand, and then you can go to the council and you can ask for that funding based on a plan that you've put together, so you know how long and how mature your program is going to be. And that would be my big recommendation, is have a plan, put it together, have somebody that's kind of dedicated to putting that plan and pushing it forward.
I love that advice, Brian. Build the plan and then work the plan. Greg, what about from you?
I think to add to what Brian said, I think on top of the plan, I think what's also helpful is a risk assessment. So understanding where the risk is within your organization is extremely valuable. There's a lot of free tools out there for governments to leverage, like the NCSR, which the MSISAC offers. CISA also offers assessment services that are free. So if you don't know your state's cybersecurity advisor, you should definitely meet them and learn all the various services that CISA provides. There's a lot of free, or all of them are not paid or free to you as a municipality. So take advantage of those. But I think what Brian said, first and foremost, there needs to be someone in your organization that is dedicated to cybersecurity. Cyber still exists within your organization. I mean, you'll still have your infrastructure people looking at cyber and having responsibilities for cybersecurity. You'll have your network people having roles and responsibilities that rely on cybersecurity in your applications. But having that one person that has this holistic view across the organization is extremely valuable. And I mean, I have great relationships with my colleagues that handle various verticals within the organization, but sometimes we're at odds. Like, they're delivering a service and their focus is to deliver that service. My focus is to make sure that they're delivering that service securely. And sometimes those are contradictory deliveries. So I think there's definitely a strong benefit to having a dedicated person that's focused on cybersecurity.
You're not speaking. If you could, there you go. Thank you. We are coming up on the end of time, so we're going to do two things we always do at the end of our sessions. First, I'm going to ask Jamie to put up our final poll question. And then for Greg and Brian, the question I have asked every speaker who has come on one of these sessions is, what is one piece of practical advice that you have for cities that are on today's call and maybe starting out on this journey? The great news is y'all have basically answered this question in a number of ways already. And so I'm grateful for that, but I gotta ask if there's anything else, again, really thinking practically for the cities on today's call. If there's any additional advice you would have, would love to have those gems of knowledge be our closing for today's conversation. And I'll invite either of you to go first.
So Tina, I would say to your question about a dedicated resource, I think it's hard enough. Both Greg and I are dedicated to cybersecurity in our respective municipalities, and we have a hard time getting that conversation going. So if you don't have that dedicated person doing that, that conversation isn't going to happen, and you're going to make yourself more susceptible. So that would be my one piece: is make sure that somebody is dedicated to that effort.
Somebody's waking up thinking about it. Yeah, that's great advice. Greg, how about from you?
I think my recommendation would be try to not be overwhelmed. It is, it's a never-ending journey, if you will. And I think it can be extremely overwhelming starting out a cybersecurity program, looking at the tech debt that you have within your organization, the risks that are impacting you, the threat actors that are way more sophisticated than any piece of technology you can implement, and the limited staff that you have. So like, the odds are against us, but don't feel overwhelmed, or try not to feel overwhelmed, and take things in stride. Understand where your low-hanging fruits are, where you can get some wins in that in your column, because the odds are against us. But I think working together and coming together as a collaborative community like this is extremely valuable. And you're not, yes, you may be the only person in your organization that is focused on cybersecurity, but you're not the only person out there in the world, in municipality, in local government. There's a community there, and we're also here to support you. So I think it's really important to make those connections with your colleagues as well, because you all are doing amazing work, and highlighting some of that can really help jumpstart other organizations in their cyber efforts.
That's I think that's a really meaningful sort of note to end this on, because for a lot of folks, those of us who have worked in public service or in public service now, there are days where it feels like the odds are stacked against you, and that does not deter us from serving, right? And from doing what we can for our communities to ensure this secure and reliable delivery of services. So thank you for that point. I'll also put in a plug for, both Greg and Brian are a part of the coalition of City CISOs, and that is a great resource for everyone on today's call and beyond. So we'll include that in our sort of summary of today's session that we'll post on the Local Infrastructure Hub website. Thanks, Greg and Brian. Thank you both so much for the session. I've learned a ton. I'm sure others have as well. For everyone joining, I'll encourage you to save the date for our next Tech and Innovation Center session, which will be held on Wednesday, December 13th, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. I want to again put a plug in for the Local Infrastructure Hub website. It's a great way to check out upcoming events on a number of topics related to the bipartisan infrastructure law. Check out the website to see those, the programming, but then also information and past recordings from our previous sessions. Thanks to everyone. Hope you had a great holiday, and take good care. See you next time.